Ancient DNA confirms cacao reached eastern North America by the 11th century. This is Planetterrian Daily, episode 164. Researchers examined residues from the Mississippian city of Etowah and detected cacao DNA in artifacts dated to the 11th and 12th centuries. The finding pushes back the known timeline for cacao consumption in eastern North America by several hundred years. Cacao, the source of chocolate, was previously documented mainly in Mesoamerica during that era. The study appears in PLOS 1 and relied on targeted ancient DNA recovery from ceramic vessels. Next steps include broader sampling across other Mississippian sites to map trade routes. On a different note, researchers define intrinsic capacity as the composite of physical, cognitive, sensory, and psychological reserves that determine functional aging. Longitudinal cohorts show that declines in this measure predict disability and mortality more reliably than single biomarkers. The World Health Organization has incorporated the concept into its healthy aging framework. Clinicians can track it through simple batteries of tests rather than advanced imaging. Ongoing trials are testing interventions that preserve multiple domains simultaneously. Now shifting from broad aging measures to specific dietary patterns that may influence long-term health outcomes. Analysis of more than 17,000 U.S. men found that higher consumption of soft drinks, packaged snacks, and processed meats corresponded to 24 to 31% elevated prostate cancer incidence after adjustment for age, smoking, and socioeconomic factors. The association held across racial and ethnic groups. Mechanisms under investigation include chronic inflammation and disruptions to metabolic hormone balance. The study used nationally representative dietary recall data. Replication in other cohorts is planned. The ultra-processed food study tracked more than 17,000 men and isolated a 24 to 31% rise in prostate cancer risk tied to higher intake of packaged snacks, cereals, and processed meats. The association survived adjustment for smoking, poverty, and race, pointing to mechanisms beyond simple calorie excess. Inflammation and hormone disruption are the leading biological explanations under investigation. What remains unclear is whether modest reductions in these foods produce measurable risk drops within a few years. Most people assume any diet cancer link comes down to excess calories or missing nutrients. In reality, ultra-processed foods appear to act through additional routes that alter inflammation and hormone signaling even when total energy intake is controlled. Right now, as you digest a packaged snack, emulsifiers and additives can shift gut barrier permeability and circulating inflammatory markers within hours. One memorable number from recent U.S. data shows men in the highest intake group had 24 to 31% higher prostate cancer incidence after standard risk factor adjustments. The next time you reach for a ready-to-eat meal, notice how many ingredients on the label have no direct culinary counterpart. Watching future trials that swap whole foods for matched ultra-processed versions will clarify whether the risk signal shrinks when those additives disappear. From population-level diet effects, evidence of food trade and consumption patterns appears in much earlier records. Yale researchers combine new computational tools with ancient DNA from museum specimens to recover sequences from two previously unknown giant tortoise populations. Both lineages disappeared after human arrival on the islands. The method improves recovery from highly fragmented samples that standard approaches miss. The work clarifies historical biodiversity on the archipelago before modern extinctions. Further application to other island systems is planned. From recovered ancient biomolecules, new computational approaches are recovering even more degraded genetic material. A study tested machine learning models on Atlantic Ocean data and showed they can flag developing disturbances several days before traditional systems detect them. The AI draws on large-scale atmospheric patterns that precede storm organization. Forecasts gain lead time without replacing existing dynamical models. The approach was validated against historical storm seasons. Operational testing with weather agencies is the next phase. From atmospheric prediction, algorithms are optimizing another complex physical process. Engineers used an algorithm to evaluate more than 100 million parameter combinations for 3D printing GR-COP42, a copper alloy used in rocket engines. After 40 physical trials, the system located 6 viable settings, including one at 500 watts. Lower power requirements expand the range of printers that can produce the material. The work reduces cost barriers that previously limited adoption. Follow-on tests will assess mechanical performance of the new prints. From machine learning in materials science, attention turns to altered gravity effects on female physiology. Begum Mathik and collaborators are extending earlier spaceflight data to examine how microgravity and radiation interact with reproductive and endocrine systems in women. The project builds on samples collected 2 years ago and adds new assays for hormone signaling and tissue response. Longer missions increase the need for sex-specific countermeasures. Data will inform habitat design and medical protocols for deep space travel. Results are expected to guide selection criteria for future crews. On another front, schools that remove student phones during instructional hours recorded measurable improvements in attention and test performance. High schools saw smaller or inconsistent effects, suggesting developmental differences in susceptibility to distraction. The study compared matched schools before and after policy changes. Teachers reported fewer behavioral interruptions once devices were stored. Provincial data collection continues to assess longer-term mental health outcomes. Shifting to agricultural findings, University of Queensland trials added green bin compost to commercial tomato fields and measured both chemical profiles and sensory panels. Treated fruit scored higher in sweetness and overall aroma intensity. The effect traces to increased availability of certain soil micronutrients that influence sugar and volatile production. Control plots without compost produce blander fruit under identical irrigation. Larger-scale adoption could divert organic waste while raising crop value. After 20 years of fieldwork, a University of North Carolina Asheville researcher compiled the initial comprehensive inventory of the island's native terrestrial reptiles in Turks and Caicos. The illustrated guide covers distribution, habitat preferences, and conservation status for each species. Several taxa are endemic and face pressure from habitat loss and invasive predators. The reference supports both scientific surveys and local protection planning. Digital versions will allow citizen scientists to contribute sightings. Researchers warn that highly pathogenic avian influenza could spill over into iconic marsupials that lack prior exposure. Bait-delivered vaccines are under consideration as a proactive shield for vulnerable populations. Modeling shows transmission risk rises with longer migration routes of infected birds. Field trials of oral vaccines in related species are already underway. Surveillance networks are expanding to detect early cases in wildlife. Linköping University experiments demonstrated that participants weighed envious comparisons more heavily when resources were allocated by majority vote than when they chose alone. The effect arises because personal responsibility diffuses across the group. When votes are unlikely to be decisive, individuals focus more on relative outcomes. The finding helps explain polarization in collective resource debates. Follow-up work will test interventions that restore accountability. Before we go, keep an eye on further validation of the machine learning cyclone models as they move into operational testing with weather agencies. That's Planetterrian Daily for today. If you enjoyed this, a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify really helps new listeners find the show. I'm Patrick in Vancouver. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you tomorrow. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at NERA Network. Links in the show notes. Quick tip from the network. Try the Do Positive Pod next. Good news in science and tech, plus one concrete action you can take. Every NERA Network show is free at neranetwork.com. Following the long arcs, story trackers on neranetwork.com follow major programs across episodes: Tesla, SpaceX, AI, space science, and more. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.